Yeah, it's just so easy to hear everything. I love these. Hey everyone, it's Chrono with Headphones.com, and today I'm still not reviewing a headphone. I actually specialize in blindfolding my friends and forcing them to listen to the headphones. However, I will indeed be giving my opinion on some headphones today, since I have a bit of a follow-up video to that IEMs and gaming video that I filmed and published. I think it was about a month ago. So basically, today I'll be trying out popular hi-fi over-ears in games. Just as I did in the last video, I'll be trying out the different headphones, of which I have 4 by the way, in the 2 small indie games that are Overwatch and Valorant. You can see that I have Overwatch pulled up here on my screen. And basically on Overwatch, I'll be going into some ranked games. In Valorant, I'll be doing some deathmatch. And I'll start out with the most affordable headphone of the bunch, which is the Beyerdynamic DT 990 Pro. So how I chose these headphones is that, well, these are headphones that I've seen commonly recommended for gaming within our audio community, but it's also headphones that I see a lot on, like gaming channels or like gaming live streams. Yeah, let's put the DT 990 Pro to the test here. Okay, so while we're loading into the game, the DT 990 Pro has this really thick, heavy coiled cable, and I have to say it's quite atrocious to use, for me at least, because where my amp is set up, it's basically at just the right length from the amp to my head, where like the coil doesn't actually like need to extend. So what happens is that the coil is just kind of sitting on my desk, on my arm, and it's kind of like heavy or annoying, so sometimes it's over my arm or under my arm. Yeah, this cable is not very friendly. Okay, so the first thing I'm really like noticing is definitely the treble. So it's not like obtrusive in like a gaming way, but it does make a lot of like the different sound cues sound quite harsh, because there's like this like top end, just like, I don't know, it's like a crisp, it's weird. And the other thing is, I wanted to mention is, 1, the imaging is very good. 2, the soundstage is actually quite spacious and wide feeling. Like it's not very intimate. However, the one thing I'm noticing is that the image distinction is not that great. So, sometimes in music we talk about instrument separation, and here it just feels like a lot of the sound cues, if they're like in the same place, they feel jumbled up. They don't feel as spaced out for me to as I'd expect. And I wonder if that has to do a bit with the fact that the treble and the bass is boosted, because the best way I could describe it is that it sort of feels like the bass is filling in the soundscape, and then that like there's a lot of top end artifacting being introduced by the really aggressive treble peaks of the DT 990 Pro. So I'd actually be curious to see if that would be improved with EQ. At least it's not like what I experienced with the i200, where like I could barely hear any sound cues because it almost felt like all treble to me. But at least the DT 990 Pro still has fairly present mids, despite, the other peaks that it has. So overall though, they feel pretty solid. Okay, so that was game 1 of Overwatch. Unfortunately, we lost, but I do have some thoughts on the DT 990 Pro. So I think it's actually quite solid overall. The only thing I have to mention is that here on Overwatch is a very busy game with, there's always like a million sound cues going on. So I feel like in a game like this that's so busy, or even in a single player game like Doom, just having a little bit more image distinction might help it in just keeping that clarity of what's going on around you. But other than that, it's pretty solid. It's just that, again, also you will need an amplifier for these. Like they will require quite a bit of juice, but so far so good. I think I'd give them the seal of approval, especially for $150. Okay, so now with me I have headphone number 2, and that is the HiFiMan Sundara, which is of course a very popular over-ear headphone in the audiophile community. When I first reviewed this headphone, I think it was like 3 years ago, and I said that it had a weak center image, which I thought made the imaging a little bit disorienting, but we'll give it another shot here. Okay, so something that is immediately noticeable is the better tonality that the Sundara has over, the DT 990 Pro. Like the bass, the mids, and the treble is a lot more balanced on this headphone. You know, it doesn't have the V-shaped sort of sound signature that the DT990 Pro has, and it definitely doesn't have mega aggressive like treble peaks, which I think actually helps like cues stand out a bit more. However, I am noticing a bit of that like not so accurate imaging. Like things left and right feel quite a bit louder than stuff that's like centered in front of me. For gaming, it's a bit more obtrusive than the DT990 Pro's like slightly not as performant image distinction. That being said though, I mean, it still has a pretty decent soundstage, and you know, it has excellent image distinction actually. It's just that the imaging doesn't feel as precise. Like, yeah, I can tell if something's like left or right, but it's not as nuanced as things transition to the center, you know, or across the stage. You know, I think that even though I really appreciate the improvements that the Sundara offers for image distinction, I would still take the DT990 Pro's imaging over it, you know, for gaming. Again, for gaming. I think for most other applications, I'd always recommend the Sundara. I just think it's a better headphone overall, but for gaming specifically, I have to say that I think I enjoy the experience more with the DT990 Pro. Alright, so headphone 3 is the HD600 from Sennheiser. Now, for this video, I actually wanted to use the HD650 since I think that the 650/HD6XX is the one you'll see used most commonly. However, I didn't have one of those on hand, and I do think that the HD600 is pretty much identical when it comes to performance and, you know, soundstage presentation, except that of course it has a different tonality. So it should still be pretty representative of that experience. When I reviewed the HD650 and HD600, you know, I've always mentioned that I wasn't a big fan of their imaging and that I didn't really recommend them for gaming, but DMS swears by the HD650. He uses them as his daily driver for gaming, multimedia use, editing, everything, right? And he loves them for games. So I'm gonna give them another shot, and well, I'm willing to see whether or not I was wrong. So let's check them out. So far, of the 3 headphones I've tried, this one definitely has my favorite tonality. And the HD6XX just has, or sorry, the HD600 has a better extended, more present treble range. And I feel as though that actually helps out in bringing the sound cues more, even more so than on the Sundara, because it strikes just the right balance in that treble. You know, it's not as aggressive as on the DT990 Pro, but it's still very present and, you know, very nuanced. So I'm really liking the tonal balance. Now the soundstage is not as wide as the others. However, it has great image distinction, and if I'm being completely honest, I don't think the imaging is that bad. Not quite as precise as the DT990 Pro, but definitely better than the Sundara. I'd say that so far, they just feel like the most well-balanced headphone. Needless to say, these are my favorites so far. They just feel as though they deliver the most balanced experience. I have no issue telling where sounds are coming from, and everything feels very clear and present. Okay, so headphone 4, what we often call the supreme or ultimate gaming headset, the Sennheiser HD800S. Now, this one comes in at a prohibitively expensive price point, which is at around $1,800. Sometimes I see it on sale at $1,300, but really you'll be in that close to $2,000 range. So let's see how they perform. It's hard to describe if you've never experienced the HD800S or a headphone like it. There is so much distinction between all the different like tracks in the mix, like all the different like gunshots, effects, abilities in the game feel so clear apart from each other, and they're very easy to pick out in the mix. And it also has the biggest soundstage. It's so unbelievably crisp. And the thing is, its tonality works really well for games because it has a really defined mid-range and really well like tuned treble. And well, it's not great for music, but it has no bass, so there's like very little in the way of, you know, you being able to hear all the different cues that you might want to listen out for. So it's just amazing. I think it's easily the best. It's just, again, very expensive, but if you can afford it, well, definitely an experience. Okay, so now we're gonna run it back but on Valorant Deathmatch. And again, we're starting off with the DT 990 Pro. Okay, so in Valorant, image distinction doesn't really matter as much because, well, there's a lot of less sound cues going on. And that's considering that it's Deathmatch, which is obviously a lot busier than your usual 5v5 game because, well, most people aren't walking and most people are just like shooting all the time. Even still, like, things stand out pretty quickly, or pretty easily, I should say. So I feel as though that aspect of sound quality is not as important. And honestly, just the imaging is what seems to matter most to me. So I think if you play games that aren't like super busy in the way that Overwatch or like Doom and those types of games are, or you know, like Battlefield, like if you're playing like Battle Royales or Valorant, CSGO, games that they don't always have that much stuff going on, I feel as though like this is actually a pretty good headphone to use. And the price point it's at, I mean, even if you add a discrete amp and microphone, it's still like at around or under the price that you'd get like one of the higher end, like for example, Astro or SteelSeries headsets. And I think that you're getting, I think, better audio quality than those. All right, so I got the Sundara now and we'll see how they perform. Yeah, not gonna lie, off the get-go, the imaging definitely doesn't feel as precise here as it did on the DT990 Pro, and it actually is a more apparent problem than on Overwatch, because here it's easier to focus on the individual like set of footsteps or sound cues. It just makes it that much more obvious that there's not a lot of nuance as things transition from, you know, left to center or from right to center or from, you know, center to the other lateral images. Yeah, some of these sounds is just hard to tell where they actually are like exactly coming from. Yeah, I mean, they're okay. I don't think I'd recommend them for gaming. Again, the imaging issue just stood out so much more on Valorant, where the individual cues just stood out so much more because there's not as much stuff going on. And honestly, I've tried gaming headsets like the Astro A40, which, you know, is like half the price of this. And I feel like it does imaging better. So I would take that over this. And I'd also take, obviously, the DT990 Pro over it. So the Sundara, you know, 9 out of 10 times I recommend it for everything else. It's amazing for music, great for movies. But for gaming, definitely not my top choice. Okay, and now we have Headphone 3 again, which is the Sennheiser HC600. So let's give these a try. The imaging actually works really well. So I guess I've been wrong all along. I haven't given them enough credit. I mean, it's really easy to tell where things are coming from. The stage is, honestly, of the 4 headphones, is the smallest, but I don't feel as though that's actually as important for these kind of games. I feel like soundstage is more important for like atmospheric, like single player games. And the thing is that because of the tonal balance, footsteps just stand out so much. It's just so easy to hear everything. Yeah, man, these rock. I really like these a lot. I think they work great, actually. Again, I just never gave them enough credit, I suppose. Okay, and now we're going back to the last headphone, which is, of course, again, the HD800S. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I noticed going back to the HD800 is just how big the soundstage is and how well isolated each like sound cue is. Everything feels so distinct from like the background sounds, and all the different guns and footsteps are very recognizable from each other. I heard ya. The precision of these headphones is unreal. Now here in Valorant, I'm noticing maybe it's because of the more subdued lower mids and bass compared to the HD600, but things sound like quieter because they're lacking their low end. However, it doesn't really matter because everything's so clear and distinct in the mix. It's just unreal. Okay, so I didn't win that game, but these are incredible. They're really expensive, but I think that particularly for competitive online shooters, they're just, I'd say, the best experience you can get for that sort of application. So HD100S, obviously, they're just amazing. Okay, so I've tried out all the headphones, and I have to say that I'm a little bit surprised. So let me start out with what was shocking. the Sundara performed quite poorly. I remember saying in the past that I didn't really like its imaging that much, but I didn't quite remember how not good it was for gaming in particular. I was also surprised by the HD600. It's both its tonality, its imaging, its image distinction. I just felt like it worked really, really well for gaming. And no, it wasn't as good as the HD100S, but you know, there's a $1,500 price gap between the two headphones, almost. And it just delivered a really great experience. And also, of course, what I love about the HD600 is that it's a great multimedia headphone. If you're like on a budget, I think that the DT990 Pro is a very good headphone for gaming. And you know, if you use EQ, it's even better, and then it becomes more acceptable for other things like listening to music or watching movies and YouTube videos and whatnot. So across the board, I'd say that my experience with these headphones was better than with the IEMs. And the other thing I found surprising was that the factors that actually made them, you know, better from one another was a bit different than the IEMs. So with IEMs, I felt as though the presentation was pretty much identical across the board in terms of their soundstage and imaging, minus the U12T, which kind of like the Sundara had a very weak center image, although it was actually more noticeable on the U12T than on the Sundara. So I felt as though on IEMs, the tonal balance really dictated how well, you know, they performed in gaming, and that's why I prefer the safer, more balanced tunings like that of the Cadenza or Blessing 2 when playing with IEMs. With over-ears, I felt as though you had to strike the right balance. Like you had to have a good tonality that was fairly neutral sounding, but you also had to have really good imaging and really good staging. So you have to be, I think, a lot more well-rounded than IEMs, or maybe just IEMs because of the presentation, they're just more solid, but I felt as though it was more variable with the over-ears. And that's sort of why the HD600 was my favorite of the more affordable headphones. I felt like it had pretty much everything just nailed down, barring the soundstage, which was the smallest or narrowest of the four. Now, if I had to rank them, for preference, it'd be HD100S, HD600, DT990 Pro, and then Sundara for gaming. As to which ones I would recommend, honestly, I'd probably say, you know, if I'm making recommendations, I have, you know, budget and their price in mind. So I'd probably say HD600, I think that's just the most solid headphone of the bunch when you consider price. Then the DT990 Pro, then HD100S, and then Sundara. So that's with like price and gaming in mind. So yeah, that is all for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video or found it useful. If you did, do consider dropping a like. If you'd like to chat with me or any other member from the headphones.com team, there will be a link in the description down below to our community Discord. Of course, for more headphone audio content, stay tuned by subscribing to the Headphone Show here on YouTube. And until next time, this is Chrono signing off.